Hello, all y'all out there in radio land. It is once again that time of the week. What time of the week is it? Well, it is that very special time of the week here on Wednesday night where we dig underneath the headlines, where we call out the establishment on their BS, generally talk about what the mainstream media is not talking about. We present issues from an international, national, and local point of view, from a leftist perspective. Got all the different kinds of socialists under the sun here. Well, not all of them. We don't have any posadists here. Which, if you've never really dove deep into the rabbit hole of various different types of socialists and Marxists, the posadists are the very, very interesting offshoot of Trotskyism that basically believes that communist alien space comrades are going to come down and save us all from the evils of capitalism, which is very interesting theory. But anyway, kind of rambling, my friends. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. So we've got a lot to talk about on the show today. So, there's a lot of high-profile stories that have been coming out. That's, we're going to touch on a little bit. I do want to spend a good chunk of time talking about some more of the obscure stuff that happened this week, particularly some things that are, cemented here on the state and local level that you might not have heard in the hubbub of, Kristen Nielsen getting the boot. Apparently she wasn't quite evil enough for the Trump administration. Also, we'll have some important updates about, not just the state, but also some other issues that really kind of slid through the cracks. I wanted to touch on a particular thing. This is very important to talk about. We're going to have a segment on the program. Perhaps when Lawrence gets here, this can be more of a debate. I've mentioned on the show before, I am certainly to the left of Bernard Sanders, and there's something he said earlier this week that really struck a nerve with me, talking in reference to open borders. Is not very happy about it. There's, again, that's going to be a longer discussion. But for the time being, why don't we start talking about some state-level news. Some good news. As I say, good news, everyone. And this is actually a follow-up to a story that we talked about several times last year. Long story short, and I'll be reading from the article, and they'll give it the proper context, but the crux of the story was that Patrick Colbeck and some high-profile Republicans on the State Board of Education were pushing curriculum changes that were backwards as all hell. It was cartoonish. Their proposed changes looked like an idea of what an Onion writer would put into an article about what modern Republicans would want in the curriculum. It was pretty bad. I'll try to dig up some dates from our previous episodes where we really talked about the contents of that in depth. But here's the good news. It's been shot down, been defeated, at least for the time being. So this was posted yesterday up on MLive's website, written by Kalamazoo's former pretty great beat reporter here in Kalamazoo. He's now since moved to Lansing, talk about state issues, Malachi Barrett. Title of the article, Cuts to Climate Change, Civil Rights Rejected in New Draft of Michigan Education Guidelines. So let's see how this went down. And again, this will give you a little bit more context of what was actually in that quite deplorable list of curriculum suggestions. Ahem. Proposed cuts to climate change and civil rights issues in Michigan classroom guidelines were rejected in a new draft of changes to social studies curriculum standards presented to the State Board of Education on Tuesday. Changes proposed in the 2018 draft of K-12 education standards sought to eliminate references to climate change, quote-unquote core democratic values, the Ku Klux Klan, NAACP, LGBT rights, and Roe v. Wade, resulting in backlash from teachers and parents across Michigan. Tuesday, the State Board of Education reviewed a new 146-page draft that restored that language and increased references to issues that were previously on the chopping block. Public outrage after the 2018 draft was published caused the state to convene a broader and more inclusive group of experts, educators, and parents. A bias review task force was also created to prevent political bias while the draft was tweaked. Deputy Superintendent Vanessa Kiesler said the standards are not about politics, but acknowledged the recent New York Times report examining political influence on the process. So I wanted to take a little side note and discuss the kind of broader context of this. So what happened? This proposal, these proposed changes were extremely retrograde. But they didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't that, we have a particularly reactionary education board that made these proposed changes. Patrick Colbeck, that walking far-right clown of a man, spearheading it. But this is nothing new. As a matter of fact, it's funny because in the last 2 weeks, I've discussed the subject of the Hopewell memo with quite a few people. And it comes to a very significant relevance here. So, real quick, again, you can hear me actually lecture about this if you would like. I talk about it to quite an extent. The recent, you can find it on the Kalamazoo Socialist Party Facebook page. I have a video from our teach-in where I talk about this dude/douche. To quite an extent, but the long and short of it, Lewis Powell, he was a Supreme Court justice. In the early 70s, he wrote a memorandum, hence the famous Powell memo, which was basically a strategic outline of how corporate America, i.e. the rich, the capitalists, could consolidate their power and basically strike at the heart of these resurgent labor and anti-capitalist movements that were really growing traction and strength in the 60s, and not only roll them back, but entrench their power and their financial stake in the country for decades to come. And it was extremely effective. And one of his key strategies was changing the curriculum at the college level, which would invariably kind of trickle down into the public institutions. Again, much more broadly, we're talking about them. The overall goal is to weaken public schools to replace and privatize them. But in the interim, it's about making these broad curriculum changes to eliminate any real criticism of capitalism and to basically rewrite history, the history that people are taught, to exclude these concepts of movements and movement building. It was very present in this draft of the curriculum changes. Even the civil rights movement, to the extent it was acknowledged, was discussed as like individual actors winning, particular legal cases, without talking about the actual movement that was behind it. So this is a part of a decades-long push in our education system, kind of strip out the context, particularly context relating to broad leftist grassroots movements, and paint history as just kind of these disconnected events that are the results of individual actions and individual actors. That's that neoliberal model right there. You know, it's like Margaret Thatcher said, there is no such thing. There's no such thing as society. Well, there is a such thing as society, and we can learn a great deal about how society functions by studying and learning about its social movements. Of course, this proposed curriculum and the kind of ideological and strategic imperative behind it would not really want you to learn about, quote-unquote, society. On that note, tell a really morbid joke, talking about Margaret Thatcher, because I think it was very recently the anniversary of her death. Here's a joke. Swimmer asks another Olympic swimmer, "Hey, let me ask you, what's your favorite stroke? You know, what's your favorite kind of stroke?" The other swimmer answers back, "Margaret Thatcher's." Oh, dun-dun. Yeah. By the way, I don't feel bad about that at all. That woman was horrible. She was the Ronald Reagan of the UK, and did a lot to put us in the mess that we are currently in. Although, backhanded compliment, I guess her and Ronnie really did more than just about anybody else to turn the current generation, that is to say millennials like I and younger, into the radical anarchists, socialists, and communists that we are currently emerging to be. So, yeah. Thanks, Maggie. Anyway. Sorry, didn't want to stray that far from local content. But let's zoom back in to this at the state level. So this is what Vanessa Kiesler went on to say. "We should not let the Republicans win and get what they want, or the Democrats win and get what they want. We've failed at the idea of presenting all the perspectives and the diversity of thought that is important for our country," Kiesler said. "We want to depoliticize them as much as possible." Again, I could criticize this to an extent. Again, this sounds a lot like neutrality bias. We have to listen to two perspectives. Okay, look, history happens one way, or excuse me. History is not multiple choice. This is a very kind of postmodernist concept. It's like, what really is the truth? Well, here's the truth. Things happened. You can analyze them. You can dive into the history and figure out the roots of how events happened, why they happened, and in what way they happened. It's really one of the really poor effects of this kind of historical analysis, it's particularly Marxist analysis, getting out of favor, out of parlance, because you're allowed to have this idea that there is a right-wing truth and a left-wing truth. No. There is a way of analyzing history that will bring you to the truth. There is a right-wing way of looking at history that it's not really based on analysis. It doesn't look at the material conditions that explain why historical events happen and how they are interconnected. Much rather, and I am someone who's read my conservative history. It's all about basically picking and choosing particular nuggets of history in order to support your argument, to support your ideological frame. I don't really think that has a place in schools or academia. It's kind of cherry picking of facts, alternative ones or real ones. Here's a good example. This is just based on our own kind of gaps in our own education system. The kind of idea that still persists to this day. All the communist countries of these evil totalitarian states. America is the land of freedom and opportunity. When you actually get down to the truth, if we're talking about nations like the USSR and Cuba, they did some really awful things. Particularly, thinking of groups like the LGBT community, there was a lot of you can have one can have their own discussions about, the necessity of rooting out reactionaries and whatnot. But yeah, Stalin did throw a lot of people who may not have necessarily should have gone and been in prison into various gulags. But the bias of our education system overshadows the fact that, in fact, America is certainly not that innocent, as Comrade Britney Spears once said. And as a matter of fact, in the totality, the final analysis has actually been a lot bloodier, a lot more oppressive, if you just break it down to the numbers, than Soviet Union or North Korea or Cuba or any of those other nations have been. Because for their flaws, they have not engaged in the wholesale destruction and murder that has been the history of the United States of America, particularly not on the behest of business interests or capital. At the very least, you can say, these nations have succeeded. I'm talking about a lot of these communist countries succeeded in providing the basic needs for the vast majority of their people. America's never done that. It's never gotten around to doing that. There have been various points in history where the working class was better off than other points, but always let people slip through the cracks, and always, and this is very important, the big difference between capitalism and socialism and communism is, the problems that occurred in a lot of these communist states were chiefly due to failures, and this is really broad strokes, failures in really applying social democracy, failures. It was a failure of socialism, a failure of trying to achieve communism. The failures of capitalism, you couldn't really even call them failures, because the goal of capitalism is not to materially improve the lives of people or make sure that we live in a workers' democracy, as is the stated mission statement of socialism and communism. Capitalism, the goal is to accumulate profit. The material needs of people and their conditions are more or less an afterthought. If capitalism works to improve the lives of people, good, but for the actual capitalists, that's really a side issue. It's about accumulating profit, Anyway, going on to talk more about this... So what does the reactionary have to say? Mr. Tom McMillan, a Republican member of the board, said bias is always present when deciding what to remove or include in social studies classes. McMillan criticized the new draft for being extremely far left and made a motion to send the draft standards back for revisions to address its serious liberal bias, historically inaccurate and sloppy nature. The motion failed in the majority Democratic board. Also, just a quick note about these Republican Fox News style reactionaries, ridiculous, extremely far left. I'd be curious to find out what his definition of extremely far left is. America has a very ridiculous idea of what constitutes quote-unquote the left. To most conservatives, it seems like anything to the left of Ronald freaking Reagan is communist to them. So, again, there is no nuance in the right in analyzing what the left actually is. Again, everybody to the left of Reagan or Clinton or whatever is well, I mean, a lot of them call Clinton a communist, and frankly, they were instrumental in solidifying the Democratic Party as an overt, because the Democratic Party has always played footsie with the capitalist class, but particularly after the 80s going into the 90s, they really cemented it's corporations first, and then I'm sure it'll trickle down to the workers, etc. So this guy McMillan goes on to say, if you want to keep getting people to leave the public schools, if you want to shrink any kind of interest in increasing public funding for schools, there will be a lot of taxpayers who say, I don't want public funding of this. Honestly, this comes at me as kind of a veiled threat. It's, again, tying back to the whole idea that, the ultimate goal for a lot of these Republicans and for a lot of Democrats as well, don't forget, especially some of these people running for president were all about, charter schools. I mean, let's not forget the recent teacher strikes out in California, which were basically trying to gut public schools in Los Angeles. Again, California is an extremely blue state. Los Angeles run entirely by Democrats, but it's that kind of flavor of corporate Democrat that shares this exact same end game, this same exact goal as this Republican Mr. McMillan here. Of course, it doesn't really talk about that context here in the state of Michigan, but just keep in mind, this isn't an entirely Republican project. A lot of Democrats have signed on to this over the years, including people such as Cory Booker, people such as the Clintons, etc. Democrats on the board said the standards are not perfect, but come closer to neutrality than previous attempts to update 2007 social studies standards. Democrat Lupe Ramos Montigny said the new standards are more inclusive, more equitable, and more rational. Kiesler said most of the changes between the 2018 and 2019 drafts are a result of public comment during the last year. Proposals to remove references to climate change and the word democratic from the phrase core democratic values were pushed by then Senator Patrick Colbeck. Yeah, I told you it was pretty ridiculous. Like, seriously, onion-level ridiculousness. Anyway, I'll go down and kind of talk about some more of the relevant points. Since the 2018 draft was introduced, State Board of Education changed from a four-partisan split to a 6-2 Democratic majority. This is kind of how this was shot down as a result of the more or less like blue-ish wave that happened in 2018. I want to talk specifically about the standards to climate change because this is of particular interest to me. Several new references to climate change were added in a portion of the standards pertaining to 6th grade geography. Standards proposed in 2018 sought to remove language on climate change. Updated standards now include references to how fossil fuel and plastics use deforestation, litter, and over-fertilization can cause changes in the physical environment, including global climate change. One section in 6th grade geography on the impact of technology on the environment has been expanded to include examples of the positive and negative effects of wind and solar power, fracking, deforestation, and the use of pesticides and herbicides. I wonder if this is like another case of neutrality bias, because again, obviously there's a hell of a lot more negatives when it comes to fracking, deforestation, and pesticides than wind and solar power. But we'll have to see, especially a 6-2 Democratic board. I will be very interested to see how this actually gets divided up, because historically this is kind of how Democrats operate. It's like try to olive branch to the Republicans. We'll do a 50-50 split. So we'll talk about how fracking gives people cancer and destroys the environment, but we'll give equal space to how wind generators are very loud, and the birds, they kill birds. I guess they also give people cancer if you are take as true anything the president says. Anyway, going on, it says an existing standard dealing with interpreting and comparing climagraphs across the world now include additional examples for how climate change impacts ecosystems. I am glad to say that again, I don't know to what extent this really grows and broadens the conversation. Back in the dinosaur era, when I was in elementary school, and I clearly remember back in 2nd grade, this would be like probably 93, I believe, 1993. We had lessons about the greenhouse effect, about how it affects the atmosphere. Definitely not as many discussions about our imminent doom as we, talk about on our show quite often. But you at least that's the thing that really gets me is like I hear people deny the science of climate change. It's like this is some basic 2nd grade science. I literally learned about the greenhouse effect when I was 6 years old. It wasn't a hard thing for me to grasp, but of course, I guess that's what happens when you follow the Powell memo in defund public schools for decades. You'll get people who think the greenhouse effect is liberal propaganda, and I guess also that the world is actually flat, and all of that were just lies told to you. Oh man, the space is a fiction. Anyway. Goes on to talk about the how it reframes the civil rights curriculum. Previously proposed changes cut references to civil rights, Roe v. Wade, the Ku Klux Klan, and the NAACP. Updated changes presented Tuesday restored many of these references and added new ones in some places. A standard dealing with 6th grade civics includes a new reference to civil rights and discussions on how governments address national and international issues. One section of the standards detailing civil rights in the post-World War II era was expanded to include reference to accomplishments and setbacks made by indigenous peoples, Latinos, new immigrants, people with disabilities, and gays and lesbians. Several events, laws, and U.S. Supreme Court rulings that occurred during the various civil rights movements were also added. A reference to the NAACP's legal strategy of attacking segregation was added in one section covering America's growth in the 20s. Proposed standards remove a reference to the KKK as an example in a section of the standards where teachers are urged to teach students about what can happen in a breakdown of the rule of law. Going on, these next two things I want to reference because they are very relevant for a discussion we'll be having on the show in just a second here. So it also references curriculum changes to the American Civil War and the Holocaust. So as far as the Civil War goes, guidelines for high school social studies were also updated to include discussion of how the Civil War led to the creation of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. New examples of anti-slavery figures were added to a section describing the resistance of enslaved people and the effects of their actions before and during the Civil War. Dope. I wonder if John Brown's in there. That's a good question. A section regarding the social, political, economic, and cultural reasons for secession was simplified, and one reference the resistance of Southern whites to African Americans taking roles in governments after the Civil War was cut. That's really too bad. That's unfortunate. Again, it sounds like more capitulation to reactionaries who don't like their own history. For those who don't know, the antebellum South, at post-Civil War, there was a huge upsurge. Black people really took advantage of their new rights. There was a whole wave of black folks who got institutional political power. Hold on just a sec. Sounds like you got somebody knocking on the door. All right, we're back. I'm now joined by dear co-host Lawrence.
Yo,
Lawrence
what up?
is in the building. Yeah. So I was just talking.
I was running late, man. I'm sorry for everybody. It's just had some errands I had to be attend to.
Oh, that's all right. It's just everybody's been listening to me rant for about half an hour about this good news about the education system. So people have been hearing me talk. I don't know if you want to shout right. So what we were just talking about is, for the most part, all of the really reactionary crap in here was shot down. There's actually going to be some new stuff in the curriculum, updated passages about climate change, more broader coverage of civil rights struggles. Here's something that was kind of made me, took me aback. They're talking about the American Civil War, and it really kind of maintains the status quo of how it's taught in schools. And one thing that I really did not like, so it says here, one reference to the resistance of Southern whites to African Americans taking roles in government after the Civil War was cut out. So what I was explaining right before you got here is like what that essentially means. They cut out the part of American history about how black people started running for office and attaining political power in the South after the Civil War, and then got terrorized, murdered, and Jim Crow'd the hell out of office. I don't know if you have any thoughts or reflections on that, Lawrence.
It's the, we talked about it before. It's the whitewashing of history, and it only shows that anything that has to deal with dissent, change, anything that expands the circle of liberty in America, it's usually looked at as a negative thing to people who want to who have made a living and has sustained their own relevance by maintaining a system of obedience and ignorance. So if you had a curriculum that's like boycotts and being informed, being educated, pushing back against oppression. If you have anything like that in your history books about objectivity and celebrating the notion that we've had African Americans in this country for multiple years, and throughout the systematic suppression and genocide and Jim Crow and apartheid that we've had in this country, that's history is laced with framing the narrative around black folks as being slow and violent and being dysfunctional. That no, we as black folks, we created American culture more than anyone else. We have contributed to American culture, and America would not be what it is if it was not for us. And to downplay any of that knowledge and relevancy, and to downplay the historical precedent it sets, only shows you how these people truly feel about the constituents of our area.
Well, what really gets me too is like, again, so what we were talking about earlier, like the education board is now 6-2 Democratic majority. But this is where they decide to like capitulate to the Republicans, is to obscure white terrorism. That's essentially what it is. It's and it comes at a time where it's like we need to be talking about this stuff because it is on the rise. But the Democrats' idea of like, okay, well, you can't get all of this ahistorical garbage in the curriculum, but you know what we'll do? We'll take out this part about how black people were terrorized in the South after the Civil War.
It's like we didn't just have two black churches bombed recently. Like we didn't just have two black historical buildings that were set on fire by white supremacists. We didn't just have a white supremacist call and say that he wanted to murder Ilhan Omar. Come on, son. Come on, son. And the fact that shows you the level of gall and ignorance on our education board to be like, yeah, we're going to take out the fact that right-wing terrorism and just white supremacy as a whole has been a problem in our country since the foundation, creation, and innovation of our country.
Yeah. And by the way, I'd recommend everybody read a book. You want to get real educated about this. The Counter-Revolution of 1776 by Gerald Horne.
That's a good book.
Yeah. So I don't know. Any other thoughts on this before we move on?
There's a couple. I have a couple more thoughts on it, but that can be held off for another time. You did bring up. We brought up the fact that there was a hearing on white supremacy. So and I wanted to bring that up.
I want to dive into that. Can we take a quick break? Because that was on my mind as well. All right. Okay, y'all listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
One day when the future there will be robots. Oh, they will come through.
It may not be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in their Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
All right, we are back. I think we're gonna pivot to. We're gonna talk about a couple of national things. Then you have this local issue you just mentioned that I didn't know about, but thanks for going to that meeting. We're gonna talk about it.
We have, before I had to dip out because I'm only gonna be here for a little bit.
Yeah.
Basically, the quick hit from in town. Shout out to M Live because M Live's been on this story since 2018, since last year.
Yeah, this is a Parchment update. Right?
Yeah. Yep. So, for those who not know, Parchment has had a PFAS problem. There was levels of PFAS that was found. Parts per trillion that was found, and it was in high concentration in our city, our sister city, and also, what was also found out is that there's lead also in the water in Parchment. And a lot of residents in Parchment don't have sewers. Some people use wells. Some people's wells are fine. Other people's are not. Some people, they've had independent testing, and there's some independent testing that showed that some of the water, a good portion of the water, enough to be concerned, doesn't have PFAS, but also has lead. A high enough count of lead in the water that is a problem. So, the meeting that was yesterday, that was basically the officials from Parchment informing the people, was like the question and answer period where the townspeople was allowed to ask questions.
Was this at like the Parchment library? Or
no, it was at some church that was on the east side of Kalamazoo.
Oh, okay.
And dog, being at that meeting was like looking at YouTube comments in real life.
Oh no.
Oh my God. Like right-wing comments on YouTube in real life. Like,
about this issue too, because I'm like, what? Because okay,
no, you had
Explain.
people, you
Yeah.
literally had people who were saying, well, I have independent well water. It doesn't affect me or my family. So why should I be taxed or be a part of trying to give the rest of the townsfolk of Parchment clean water? And that was literally the position of a majority of people from Parchment. And I'm sitting here like, okay, cool. Let's use your framing. Your independent well water that you have is fine. Okay? I'm going to use your framing. Your independent well water is fine. You're telling me that you want your neighbor's water who may be contaminated. You're not trying to help with that. You are okay with your neighbor having poison water just because your water's fine.
Oh my God.
Like seriously.
You gotta take time out of your day to go to a community meeting to talk about how we shouldn't help the community. Like,
right.
what the?
Basically, I was sitting,
God.
dog. Like I was sitting, like, because shout out to PMN. PMN recorded the entire thing, and I was a part of the recording. I was a part of them helping them out, and like I was asking some of the people that was with me. I was like, dog, what's wrong with y'all people, man? I was gonna say at the end, I was like, Andy, dog, what's wrong with your people, man?
I'll say this much, like, even it reminds me, like, I remember we had a discussion several months ago about like a meeting in Comstock. There was this racist ass flyer, but I remember, like, at that meeting, I was actually kind of impressed. There was a lot of nuance. There were a lot of people actually talking about like the rights of the people in like these immigrants going to the greenhouse, and some people had some really bad takes, but even the people who didn't seem very educated or maybe were a little bit more right wing, they were actually like concerned about the community. These people that you're talking about at this Parchment meeting, it sounds like I mentioned earlier that quote from Margaret Thatcher about there's no such thing as a society. It's like, yeah, I guess like these MFers took it to heart. It's like, just me and mine. That's all I gotta worry about,
dog.
And
the rugged individualism was real in that place, dog. Like real talk. I have a strong distaste for the government, and I don't trust y'all or the government and all this stuff. While government officials are telling you, hey, these sections of Parchment have been tested for lead and PFAS. like, yeah, just because your individual well water may not test for it now, that does not mean it may not be testing for it later. So we're trying to do some infrastructure to make sure that people get clean water. Like, and it was like, we're not voting on it now. We're just trying to get y'all prepared for what's going on and what we have found. Like, and that was it. Like, don't get me wrong. When it comes to national news and federal news, I'm usually on it, and local news usually doesn't do it for me. But man, being in that room, and like I'm not trying to throw shade at Parchment, because I really do care for the people in Parchment. I want everybody who's in that area, and also on the north side and east side of Kalamazoo, because a lot of our water does go through. A lot of Parchment's water does go through our systems and stuff. I want us to be safe, all of us in the area to be safe. But you cannot argue against your own self-interest. And that's literally what was going on.
You know what I say too is like, because I will again, not to throw shade at Parchment. What I will say is like, I know there are a lot of people in Parchment who don't think that way, and it's not even necessarily that they're right or left. It's just like people who actually give a crap about the community. Y'all gotta show up to those meetings, because otherwise, all you're gonna get at those meetings are clowns who it's like.
Dog, people who don't understand what a question is. Like, during the question and answer period, they didn't have questions; they had statements. It was like watching Alex Jones on Fox News. Like, that's really what it was. I was sitting there like, bruh.
Yeah, because like the important thing is like, you might not want to take time out of your day to go down these, but your voice is important. Otherwise, these elected officials are only gonna hear from people who, frankly, just like the sound of their own voice, but don't know what the hell they're talking about. Yeah, you know what I mean.
A lot of people will say that about us, but you know what I'm saying, we have facts. So I mean, like, I
do my research, son.
Right.
Ah,
Right.
yes. Yeah.
Right. But also, speaking of facts, white supremacy and right-wing extremism has skyrocketed since our first African American president, since President Obama,
And the current dog whistler in chief,
yeah.
of course.
So there was a hearing on it. There was a bunch of people
in Congress, by the way. This is talking about national thing.
That had Black Republicans and Black Democrats going to talk about the effects of white supremacy and bullying and things of the nature online. And there was some fantastic testimony and some heartbreaking stories. I encourage everyone, if you have time, to check out the entire hearing. Check out some of the hearings, cause man, it was amazing to see. But there was some clowns that was there.
Yep.
And one of those clowns was Candace Owens. Like, now, Candace Owens, out of all the Black Republicans that they could have had to talk about the rise of white supremacy in this country, Michael Steele, No, the only one I would want to hear from is Michael Steele, because Michael Steele,
Yeah.
Even though I disagree with him on policy wholeheartedly, he at least understands how to make an argument. Like, he can make an argument that sounds substantive, even though when you put it to practice with policy, it's absolutely dribble and garbage. Like, but he's a better arbiter to have this conversation. Candace, on the other hand, is a basket full of troglodytes wrapped in wrapped in incoherent sentences. Like, and the only reason why I'm highlighting her is because one of the Democrats that was in the conversation played Candace Owens' statements about Hitler for the committee. And she tried her best to explain it away, and my God, the level of shade that you throw when you let someone dig their own hole and then they continue to dig it.
Oh, by the way, for those of you who don't know the quote, Candace Owens, basically what she said about Hitler, to sum it up, is, Hitler would have been cool if he'd have just stayed in Germany and not which I think that's what the administration at the time thought too. It was like, oh, yeah.
No, it was her quote was, when you think of nationalism in America, the first thing people think of is Hitler, and his problem wasn't nationalism, his problem was globalism. But that's literally what she said. Yeah. She said that he was too ambitious with his plan. He wanted everyone in the world to speak German and everyone in the world to be blonde haired and blue eyed.
Of course, good nationalist countries like the United States, we never impose our culture or economic system on anyone else.
No.
Here's
the thing. The thing is, the alt-right uses Candace Owens as a mouthpiece. If you do not know, if you somehow do not know, Turning Points USA is usually has 4 to 5 talking points, and 4 of those talking points is, hey, we have a black woman saying this right-wing stuff.
I did want to mention just real quick, because I do monitor a lot of the right wingers and right-wing media, and just her very presence there. It's literally checkmate liberals. Because the idea around it is innately, if you have a black woman saying white supremacist talking points, then there's no way they could possibly be white supremacists, or what? There's no way those points could possibly reinforce white supremacy, but by virtue of the fact that it is a black or non-white person saying them.
I mean, that's Fox News 101.
Yeah.
I have a woman to talk about how women don't need equal rights. I have a Latino person. I have a person who's brown skinned to go on Fox News to talk about how immigration is bad. Like, it's Roger Ailes 101. I'm going to use people to push an agenda that will hurt the people who are saying it. And Candace Owens fits that bill. Game recognized game, man. She's the new Stephen Fletcher, and like I'm not mad at it because Turning Points USA writes her one hell of a check. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, game recognized game. It was the same thing with Stacey Dash. It's the same thing with Ben Carson. It's the same thing with Jesse Lee Peterson. Like, these are, when you look at their ideology and the things that they talk about, and you actually put it to policy, it will hurt the people who they say they care about, which is black people. So it's like it's unproductive. It is asinine. It's repugnant. That's what it is, man. And it only makes it only dilutes the conversation so that we don't have an actual structure of substantive conversation. Okay, because one of the conversations that they were having was about they brought up the fact that the ACLU said they're white supremacists and right wingers have done an overwhelming majority of the terrorist attacks in America. We've brought that up multiple times. They've talked about...
That's according... By the way, that isn't according to like some fringe left-wing publication. That's according to the FBI.
Yeah.
We're not typically fans of, but they're
the FBI who initially when the study came out, the study came out under George W. Bush. President Obama.
Such a left-wing president.
President Obama. It was ordered and done under George W. Bush. It was that's the first one. The more recent, the one that President Obama got chastised for was the one that George W. Bush did, and then the ACLU only looked at 2018. Only looked at 2018 and saw that an overwhelming majority of them was done by white right-wing extremists. And trying to ignore it, trying to say that there's a war on white men, trying to say that trying to ignore the systematic oppression of black people for centuries, and then to counter that narrative by talking about either family values or personal responsibility, and looking at the unequal treatment of white right-wing extremists under the law, or how it's even being perceived, is ridiculous. Because you're telling me someone like Tamir Rice can be shot and killed, who was a child, within 2 seconds because he was playing with a toy gun, but Dylan Roof murdered 9 people, assassinated a congressperson or a congressperson in a black church, and then got Burger King afterwards. It bothers me. I think the thing that bothers me the most is that we don't even live in the same reality most of the times with some of these people.
No, man.
And that's the thing that bothered me the most.
I mean, deconstructing that could be its own show. A lot of it has to do with the repeal of the fairness doctrine and how, our media has ossified to a point where it's like you have your left-wing media, you have your right-wing media, and never should the two cross paths.
Except when Bernie does town halls.
Except when Bernie does. And as much as we criticize American history and look at the vectors of American history of kind of the confluence of capitalism and white supremacy, there was a time where if you turned on the television, you could hear opinions that differed from your own. We no longer live in that time. So, the right wingers in your circles, they constantly have their their opinions reinforced. And to be fair, that you could say something similar, particularly for like the corporate left channels like MSNBC, or even people like you and me who follow a lot of independent media. Granted, I will watch like right wing things every now and again just to kind of see what the other side is talking about. But we all kind of have our own media ecosystems that we have kind of segregated ourselves into.
I mean, you can always go to CNN and see them have a panel discussion with Republicans and Democrats to talk about what is and what is not racist, or when things are clearly racist. Like it's
to be fair, CNN, they will have on a diverse range of opinion, unless you're anti-capitalist. Then
no, unless you're an actual
hell off TV.
No, unless you're actual progressive, because like they'll have as close to a progressive, because they fired Mark Hill. Van Jones only comes on once in a blue moon, and they haven't had Nina Turner back on there when she said, when she broke down the fact that white supremacy has been a problem in America long before Trump, and I'm just sitting here like, yeah, when we have actual people who want to talk about some real substance, they're not allowed on TV. But they will give you the corporate stance all day. Now, and the problem that I have is that we don't, like, for example, we talked about Ilhan Omar earlier. How many newspapers, articles did you see that called what happened to her a right-wing terrorist threat?
Yeah, exactly. And
because think about this. If it was a Muslim man who said, "I'm going to kill," name a Republican. I'm calling
Mitch McConnell.
Yeah. A Muslim man says that I'm going to, or not even Muslim, a black man calls Mitch McConnell and says, "Yo, I'm a X, Y, and Z," right?
Yeah.
The same thing, and he said the exact same words that white dude said about Ilhan Omar. Every single newspaper that you would have said, this terrorist, we have terroristic threats on the right wing. That would have been said all day, every day. This white man not only spells out his name, he spells out his name, and he has the privilege of saying, "Yeah, I'm going to put a effing bullet in Ilhan Omar's head." And he thought that it was okay. He thought it was cool. Like, and you did not see the backlash from the mainstream media saying, "Dog, Ilhan Omar's getting terroristic threats," because that's what that was. A threat of violence done for religious or political, or done because of religious or political means, is a terroristic threat.
Yeah, I mean,
by Webster's definition.
I mean, that deaf ears, and again, like, sometimes when we talk about these things, people think we're like being conspiratorial, but it's been proven over time. This is just how the mainstream media functions. The Israeli lobby has a lot of friends at CNN and MSNBC. Not only that, but Ilhan has really gone out of her way among the freshman class of democratic socialists to be overtly critical of American foreign policy and American imperialism. That's why I feel like she gets even a little bit more of extra ostracization than we see towards Rashida Tlaib or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Jamie Presley.
They don't like them either.
Well, they don't like them either. No. But the fact that Ilhan is like going on the floor and dressing down people like Elliot Abrams, there is that extra bit of it's like you do not challenge the military industrial complex. They do not like that one little bit, and they will go. What did Chuck Schumer once say? They'll find every 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. That kind of stuff.
No. But the other thing is, when you look at their own logic, they don't. It doesn't make sense because she said that she's for boycotting Israel. She's also said she's for boycotting Saudi Arabia. So by their logic, by the establishment's logic, she's a self-hating Muslim.
Yep.
Because she's for boycotting Saudi Arabia, and so it is the framing and just pure lack of courage from people who are supposed to be telling us the truth to actually hold people accountable when they do criminal acts, especially when it comes to racism in this country, because it is racism and white supremacy, mostly because they see themselves in the kids that they're doing, that in the people that are doing those things. And until we actually have until people are being held at the same standard as everyone else, then we will never have that system when power does not corrupt the system that we are using. So that's my main thing. I do actually have to dip out though.
Real quick before you go, I did just want to give a quick hit on. So the War Powers Act passed.
Oh yeah.
So that is some good news.
Oh yeah. The War Powers Act did pass.
And we've talked about it more extensively on the show, but I just wanted to mention, that is a really huge deal. Keep in mind, we've had a bipartisan interventionist consensus.
Shout out to Ro Khanna.
Yeah.
Shout out to Tulsi Gabbard. Shout out to what's his name? Bernie Sanders. I know he was also in support of it. Shout out to the Justice Democrats and a brand new Congress and all the other progressives that's been fighting for this. Because for a while you would thought that you would think that the Democrats are just for war as much as Republicans. So shout out to the real progressives that got it done. This is a fun fact about that. America laughed when Russia was in Afghanistan for 9 years. We laughed. Our country to put out editorials about how the USSR and how Russia is destroying their own country because they were in Afghanistan trying to rule these people. And they were in Afghanistan for 9 years. We had been in Afghanistan since for 18.
Yep, the Afghan war can buy porno mags and cigarettes this year. Man.
Oh, man.
So that is some good news. Again, be very interesting to see what Trump says when it hits his desk, because he'll probably veto it. Okay, actually, I'm sorry. One last thing before you go, Lawrence.
Go ahead.
And if you don't want to talk about this extensively, I understand, because this could keep you here for another half hour. But I wanted to talk about Bernard's comments on open borders. Frankly, I was going to drag him a little bit. And I wanted to make sure, because I know, I'm a little bit to the left. I'm real critical of this stuff. I kind of want to see what your thoughts were on it. I
actually have two quick things. I have a thing after this, and then I want to talk about President Obama gaslighting the left.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was another thing. I saw the video of what everybody was posting, and they was trying to have it like a ha, we got him. He's not for open borders. And I'm like, name a Democrat that's for open borders.
That I will agree with. It is kind of, none of them do. Nobody elected in Congress or Senate approves.
But that's and that's the whole point. This is another way. In many ways, this is another gaslighting tactic in the way that the reparations questions was a gaslighting tactic. Now, should border security and border security be a part of a platform for the Democratic Party? Absolutely, 100%. And in the latest polling, I think it was 80% of the country agrees that we should not have open borders. So it's not a popular idea to have open borders.
I will admit I'm in the minority on this one.
Yeah. But here's the thing, though. If you the opposite of open borders, if you want to go to the extreme opposite, would be what Trump wanted, was to shut down the southern border, which would have destroyed the economy, which would have destroyed trade from Mexico. And it's amazing how he wants to shut down the southern border and not the northern border. I'm just putting that out there. But the thing that makes me upset about the video that everybody's saying is that Bernie said something that was completely reasonable. Like, I was in here, I was sitting thinking about this. I was like, what was the thing that they wanted him to say that's supposed to be so unreasonable? Like, yeah, I'm for open, like, because this is like he's for open borders. Yeah, the right wing uses that as a talking point to fight against the left because a majority of the country would agree with the right wing on it. No one wants open borders, but an overwhelming majority of Americans do want immigration reform. An overwhelming majority of Americans want a pathway to citizenship. An overwhelming majority of Americans do want trade policy, but trade policy that positively affects unions and workers in America. So if we're going to talk about open borders from those perspectives, then we can have substantive conversations and disagreements. But if you're not talking about that from those perspectives, then you're just being a hack. The right wing does it as a talking point to punch the left, but then you'll have left wingers who are trying to use it to downplay progressives who actually have comprehensive plans, so they can score cheap political points. It's a BS argument unless we're going to get specifically into actual substantive policy.
You know, that's an important point to bring up, because, you know, again, I say, like, you know, I am for open borders. You know, yeah, I'm kind of like an anarcho socialist / communist. But
and just to state my position, I am not for open borders. No. So. And I would put myself as a democratic socialist.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention, though, is you know, I don't like the way that this is necessarily framed, because here's the way I look at it. I support open borders. Do I support open borders tomorrow? Would I just, if I could, like, snap my hand, or snap my fingers like Thanos and, like, make open borders tomorrow, would I do it? Hell no. Because you have to look at the material conditions. The way I look at it, open borders is part of kind of a set of, like, aspirational kind of leftist policies. So here's how I'd like it to be framed. What would need to happen for us to create open borders? That's like my main critique is, like, you know, look at, like, what Bernie said. There was a real opportunity there to explain what open borders means, particularly in the idea of, like, kind of international solidarity and international socialism, and explain, here's what would need to happen for us to get there. You'd need, you know, just concretely, I think you need, like, a Marshall-style plan for a lot of these countries that, frankly, we had a great hand in ravaging economically, militarily, etc. You make it so, you know, the planet, the economy, the international economy functions on a more level playing field. That way you get to a point where there's not as much of a problem with open borders, and open borders come about more organically. And, you know, yeah, I would agree. You wouldn't want to just do it tomorrow, but I think it was just disappointing to me, because I think, like, that needs to be a real stringent goal of the left. And particularly when you're talking about because even, you know, Bernie has talked about creating, like, a progressive international. You know, if you don't really put that into practice of how that's going to affect working people in the global south, then it's all just a lot of talk. Because you got to talk about, it's like, here's the tangible steps we need to get to where we can have this kind of international. And I understand from a practical, pragmatic, political perspective, that would be a very unpopular thing to talk about. for Bernard. He's running for president. He's not running for president of the best leftist in America. But again, I think like he could have used his platform to talk about it in a more nuanced way. And again, like, I think like that needs to be a goal of the left. That's something that I don't think, for me, that's non-negotiable as like a real stringent internationalist. Again, we need to make it very clear. We're not talking about doing it tomorrow, but we need to look at like what tangible steps would need to be taken to get to that place.
Andy, you're such a globalist, man. I don't. You're a globalist. I don't know how I feel about that. No, I'm just joking.
Big difference. Just any right-wing reactionaries. That's a big difference. Socialism calls for an international of workers. Globalism is when global elites, capitalists run the world. So yeah.
No, there are some parts of what you said that I agree with, and there are some parts that I am going to disagree with you on. So the parts that I agree with you on, when you look at it practically, when you look at it as a practical manner, Europe and the UE, so France, Canada, Germany, Sweden, Amsterdam, all of those wonderful countries that are near each other, where you could literally drive. You can go from Italy and all those other places. Okay, so you want to talk about a trade or being able to freely go in between these places without being harassed or having a problem, or having a lack of education or healthcare or things of that nature. Okay. Because Europe's been doing it for so long, you can have that as a model of how we would look at an open borders type of situation here in America. The thing is that those other countries have social safety nets in place for people who do work across borders, who do have either work visas or their dual citizenship, have dual citizenships or things of that nature. So they have an infrastructure that's already in place for a social safety net, for not only a social safety net, but for immigrants and people who are refugees to be able to transition safely. We don't have that. We don't have that. We're nowhere near that.
No.
And if Bernie has not explored or talked about that yet, okay, I can see you. I can definitely see you being upset, being like, yo, he could have used the bully pulpit the same way he's done on multiple situations to talk about issues that needs to be talked about, and that is also an issue that needs to be talked about. But this is also the issue that, well, for one, it does need to be brought up because climate change is a thing, and we're going to have multiple refugees and immigrants coming to our country because of climate change. That is a reason why it needs to be brought up. Here's the other issue. That's not how the question was being framed. That's not how the question the person was being framed. I don't think I haven't checked his website to see if he actually has a I've checked his website, and he does have a immigration policies. Is nowhere near what you're talking about when it comes to open borders, but it would lay the groundwork for a discussion like that to happen. So in your eyes, as someone who's farther left than me, it would be a half measure, but it's the foundation of what you would want to start having the conversation on. Yeah. So, from that perspective, I would be like, I would want to see Bernie talk more about immigration policy, trade policy, how global warming will affect migration of human beings, those type of things. I would like to see him talk more about, because those are real issues, real things.
Or, make some basic connections. Trump just withdrew funding from a whole, like Honduras, a couple of other South American countries, countries that a lot of these migrants are coming from. And of course, the reason those migrants are coming from those countries is because of years of economic deinvestment and meddling from our government. I think he should make that connection, use it to beat Trump over the head with.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I definitely agree with that. But the reason why for me it's a non-starter is because there's no one in our body politics right now that actually has a substantive plan of moving towards something like open borders, and no one has made a substantive argument in our country that would in our body politics that would clearly explain how it would positively benefit Americans. And until that is actually done, it's not going anywhere. So to speak on that issue without having a relevant plan, talking about how it's benefit Americans, talking about how it would benefit the world as a whole, and talking about how it would benefit our standing as a country in the world, would be counterproductive as someone who's trying to run for president. But I would argue saying that the Statue of Liberty and our foundation of our country was built on immigrants moving here and making America better, making America greater because of their influence. So that is a way that you can frame it, and that is a way that you can structurally say, like, look, I'm going back to the founding principles of our country. We said, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to break free. I lift my light to the golden door. And this is my interpretation of how we move forward to that ideal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that's a better way of framing and looking at the idea, and then having policy that's attached to it. No one in our body politics have done that. And the fact that you have people who are gaslighting, trying to say that, Bernie doesn't like immigrants or brown people or whatever, and the whole narrative behind it is BS.
Yeah, and I'll just say real quick, if you're as radical as me, or wherever you're at, I would classify it's like a Marty McFly idea. And what do I mean by that? To quote Back to the Future, I guess you guys weren't ready for that yet, but your kids are gonna love it. I wanted to make sure, Lawrence. I know there's some other stuff you wanted to hit on. I don't know if you still have time.
I have a little bit. I'm gonna hit the highway. I'm gonna hit the highway as soon as we get done with this. So President Obama was at a function. I forgot what the function was, but he basically was at a function to speak on the more progressive people in our body politics now. The way that he chose to talk about it was not telling corporate Democrats, hey, stop undermining progressives. No.
And I should mention, in the context of this too, is there have actually been a lot of very corporate neoliberal Democratic pundits in the media who have actually been saying, you know what? Maybe it is the turn of the progressives. I mean, we're talking about literally people who wrote the policy framework for the Democratic Leadership Council, saying, hey, maybe we should give people like AOC a turn, let them have the wheel. But what did Obama say?
Dog. I mean, you want to talk about a turn? Even Jake Tapper, the guy with the best porn star name of all time, was on the CNN saying, hey, I think Bernie's the front runner. They got really scared of saying, oh my God, I think Bernie's in the lead. Is this real?
Dun, dun, dun.
Right. It was like the dramatic music just hit from Us. You know what I'm saying? I got the slow down version of I Got Five on it. You know what I'm saying? Just and that movie. Oh my God, that movie's amazing. But anyway, President Obama basically said, "Hey guys, you have to remember. Don't think you have to remember when you talk about policies. You got to remember we have to pay somehow. We're going to have to pay for it, and you don't want to have too big of ideals. You know what I'm saying? You have to, and I'm paraphrasing when he says, you have to remember that the politics is about letting people who have other opinions, you have to listen to other people who have other opinions outside your own. And I'm sitting here like, we went from yes we can and moving forward to take what they're going to give you.
It reminds me of
like
that,
what?
It reminds me of that meme, like the centrist is like, listen, politics is about compromise, and the left is like, okay, well, will you compromise with the left? And they're like, hell no, we meant compromise with racists.
Right,
not-
right, like, cause no. Speaking of, this came out, and also recently, what came out is about the DCCC. So the DCCC said, the DCCC said that they were no longer going to mess with people who are going to primary incumbent Democrats if they're, from the left. They're still taking money and endorsing candidates who will be primarying incumbent Democrats, but if they're from the right wing of the Democratic Party. I don't want to hear anyone talk about unity when the DCCC is funding candidates who are trying to take incumbent Democrat seats with candidates who are more to the right of the people who are in the incumbent seat. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. One, it shows you the analysis of our former president, that we have to fight. That he talked about how he pushed healthcare, and then he was going to fight to make healthcare better. I don't remember him doing that, but it's okay. He did fight for a Republican healthcare plan, and he fought to make sure that the Republican healthcare plan was okay because the Republicans tried to kill it. And they've been steadily, they've been consistently stabbing it and trying to kill it. So, look, I get it. It's not going to be perfect. But at the same time, you're supposed to go into a negotiation fighting for double or triple of what you want so you can negotiate down to exactly what you want.
Yes.
That's not how President Obama's legacy goes.
That's not how most Democrats operate.
Yeah, they operate from, I want to compromise from the right-wing position. I want to compromise from where the right wing is, forgetting the fact that the right wing is proto-fascist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if a moderate Republican or a centrist Democrat who acts like a moderate Republican is negotiating with a Republican, you're going to get far right-wing Republican policy.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what happened with Obamacare.
Yeah.
As much as they moan about that plan was literally created by the Heritage Foundation.
Yeah. So the thing that makes me angry about this is that a president who talked about hope and change, a president who said that talked about yes we can, and that we can fight for better ideals, a president that talked about for the longest of time of uniting Americans, yet he's going against the will. He's going against people who represent the will of the American people. Think about this. Like, seriously think about this. Overwhelming majority of Americans, 70% of Americans support Medicare for all. 52% of Republicans support Medicare for all. President Obama didn't support Medicare for all. He doesn't support Medicare for all now. He did recently come out in a speech talk about universal basic income. Yet he doesn't he doesn't actually support a pathway of actually getting there. He just said the words, which is classic Obama. I'm gonna reflect the ideals that I have, that you have, back onto you, so you perceive that I'm more progressive than I actually am. The fact that 72% of Americans believe in Medicare for all, Overwhelming majority of Americans believe in universal free college and tuition. Overwhelming majority of Americans want to raise the minimum wage. An overwhelming majority of Americans want to get out of the wars. That he went from 2 wars to 8 to 7, and then Trump added another one on top of it. He talks about how we need unity and not have a circular firing squad, and he talks about how we need to that we need to be more practical. There's nothing practical about being cynical and or pragmatic about a catastrophe. You need there's nothing practical about gradualism when you're dealing with a catastrophe, and that's what we have. And he's going against people who represent the will of the American people, not just Democrats, but the overwhelming majority of Americans. And it's funny that he came out and did this, and I didn't hear him speak out about Ilhan Omar when she was being attacked, about a circling firing squad. I didn't hear him talk about how we don't need to have a circling firing squad when Nancy Pelosi was dissing the Green New Deal. I didn't hear him come out and talk about. I didn't hear him come out and say talk about a circling firing squad when it came to the threats on Ilhan Omar's life. I didn't hear him talk about a circling firing squad when they did the referendum on anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And then they changed it to all hate matters because the black.
Or, I mean, the recent APAC conference where everybody was dragging Ilhan, not by name, but I mean.
Yeah. But that's my point. Where was his condemnation for Steny Hoyer and Chuck Schumer and all of them when they were going after progressives? When the progressives were right, he didn't have that condemnation for them. He didn't go and talk to them. He didn't go and try to gaslight them. He went after the progressives because the progressives have the will. The progressives are backed by the will of the people. If President Obama came as advertised, as saying, "Look, I'm a centrist, and I'm a centrist because of these values," and he argued on the merits of those values, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But he doesn't. He comes in like, I am the most progressive person in the room, and I am going to reflect the values that you believe back to you. He came out saying that he was for universal basic income, but he wasn't for an actual structure or way to get there, a substantive way of getting there. So
it kind of reminds me of the discussions about reparations. You know?
Yeah. And that's and I'm glad you brought that up because it's not like he wasn't president and he couldn't push for these things. It's not like he didn't have the bully pulpit, because we saw when it came to him campaigning, and when it came to him campaigning, he was a lion. He was fighting all the time. When it came to him talking about the Affordable Care Act, he was an animal. He was going after it. He was fierce. But when it came to actually pushing policies that the American people didn't like TPP, expanding the wars, the NDAA Act, that which destroyed our Fourth Amendment rights and expanded the NSA, CIA spying on Americans, him droning other countries, and then him having the nerve to say don't have big bold ideas to progressives. Come on, dog. Come on, dog. And I love, and let me just put this out there, because I know talking about President Obama is like a third rail. I love President Obama. I do. I love President Obama. I voted for him twice. I wanted him to win because he was a better alternative than what we had. But at the same time, I would be lying if I said he was not a moderate Republican. That's not my words. That's his. He said in an interview that if you look at my policies, if you look at my policies, and I said them back in the 1980s, people would say I'm a moderate Republican. He's right.
I guess I would thank Obama for disenchanting an entire generation of liberals and pushing them back towards socialism and criticizing capitalism. It's like, Obama, Occupy Wall Street. That was part you, baby.
I mean, dog.
I'm sorry. That was really like kind of a backhanded compliment.
No. I mean, Occupy Wall Street. The Dakota Access Pipeline. Him not standing for teachers when the teachers unions. Why do you think we had so many teacher strikes that happened under Trump? Mm-hmm. Like, come on, y'all. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, he was a good steward for the economy. He was a good steward. He was a good manager. Was he a progressive leader? No.
I think you can only be such a good captain on a sinking ship.
Yeah. No. Yeah. You can save a lot of lives, but if you're only worried about the millionaires and billionaires that's on your ship, and you care more about their needs than everybody else's, then we have a problem.
Yeah.
The problem is that you don't think that the ship is sinking. You're still trying to get it home.
Oh yeah, it's like I'm going to be the best captain possible. This is like kind of where a good metaphor for his kind of like the constraints of neoliberalism in his presidency. It's like he's heading straight for an iceberg, and it's so, like he's like everybody's like, oh, he's such a good captain, and he's like, you got to avoid that iceberg, and he's like, oh, I can't. What iceberg? What are you talking about? Hits the iceberg. He's like, oh, sorry. Yeah.
My thing is, and this is the thing that bothers me the most, is that I'm like, I would love to hear him keep that same energy for the Democrats, for the more conservative Democrats. The problem is that he's not going to keep that same energy because he agrees with them.
Yeah.
And he won't come out and say it. Doc, just come out and say it. Just come out and say you agree with them more, and then we can move on.
Well, I mean, he can't because he's still like, here's the problem where I think like a lot of Americans, left or right, they have such like the memories of goldfish, because it's like everybody lionizes Obama now because of just how much better he is in comparison to Trump, but it's that kind of hero worship blinds you to like what actually happened under his presidency and what his actual policies were, and how a lot of it led directly to where we're at right now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think with that, let's go ahead and take a break. Y'all listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Is important. From deciding Kalamazoo's best drunk food to picking the fan favorite for Wider's Battle of the Bands, voting allows people to voice their opinions and change their world. To vote for offices such as mayors, senators, and the president takes a little more than a link to a Google Forms survey. Before you vote, you have to register. This can be done in person, by mail, and in many states, online. For more information, you can point your favorite web browser to vote.gov.
Hey y'all, we are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. Quick shout out to Quantum Fleek. They are the band who is providing today's bed music. And this is from their recording right here in the Wider Studios back on July 20th of 2017. So we got a few more stories that I really want to hit on today. And we're going to be going back to Michigan here, and in particular, let's start very local and then kind of spread out from there. So, that's not the right one. Okay. So, let's talk a little bit about our outgoing mayor, Mr. Bobby Hopewell. This is a story that really piqued my interest because of kind of the implications of it, in particular, some of the decisions he made in the last few years of his mayorship. And again, like this is a story that won't really make much sense unless I throw in some context. So what I'm going to do, let's talk a little bit about the actual substance of the story, and then I'll explain kind of my leftist concerns, critiques of the story here. So Mayor Hopewell has been appointed to the MEDC Executive Committee by Governor Whitmer. And this article is by Winter Kiefer. It's published on April 5th. He's going to be one of the 11 new members appointed to the Michigan Economic Development Corporation Executive Committee by Governor Whitmer. Hopewell was appointed to the committee to represent public entities. His term expires April 5th, 2020. Hopewell, of course, for those who don't know, he's been the longest-running mayor in Kalamazoo. He was first put on the city commission in 2003. Mayor in 2007 is going to be finishing out his last term in 2019. So for about 12 years as mayor. The Michigan Economic Development Corporation collaborates with more than 100 economic development partners to market Michigan as, quote-unquote, the place to do business, assist businesses in growth strategies, and fosters the growth of vibrant communities across the state, according to the MEDC website. So, okay, here's what concerned me, really raised my eyebrows more than just about anything in this article. He's going to be on the MEDC Executive Committee to represent public entities. So, let's talk a little bit about Mayor Hopewell's legacy. We're talking a little bit, vis-a-vis Obama being like, the decent captain on a sinking ship. Kalamazoo is by no means a sinking ship, but we are at a crossroads. We are at a point where we are really looking at what kind of future the city of Kalamazoo is going to have, what kind of city we are going to be, and what you have in Kalamazoo, you have the seeds for two very different kinds of futures. And this is really my opinion. You have one where we become a much more egalitarian city, where we take, the educational base that we have, really seek to democratize our communities, which, we have like a very well-educated working class population in this town. We have these this kind of insurgence of radical anti-capitalist organizing. What comes to mind most particularly is the work of homeless activists in the last year and a half. Or we become a playground for the rich. We become a gentrified city where, and you can already see this go downtown, the sky rises being built downtown, which are catered to luxury business people, luxury apartments. As long as I've lived in Kalamazoo, which has been my entire life, there's been a demand for affordable housing downtown. There is housing being built downtown, and there will be people who can afford it, but it is definitely not, quote-unquote, affordable housing. We are looking at a city that is being built up to draw in, because here's one of the issues that programs like the Foundation for Excellence are trying to address in their very kind of top-down neoliberal way. The tax base, the main tax base of Kalamazoo, is primarily a lot of the workers, the people who work in our restaurants, the people who drive the buses, the people who work at Bronson and Borges, the people who keep the universities clean and the landscapes managed. It doesn't make for a very wealthy tax base. Some of the wealthiest business people in Kalamazoo don't live in Kalamazoo proper. They live in Portage. They live in, along the lake shore. They commute into the city, leave at the end of the day. And while we do have, our middle-class enclaves in neighborhoods like the Weston Chill and Winchell, A lot of that primary tax base lives outside the city. What's being done now is to draw that particular kind of crowd back into the city, to live downtown, to live around. One of the bad side effects of that is gentrification. And you already see this. The southern edges of the north side, the northern edges of the Vine neighborhood, closest to downtown, are being gobbled up. I myself had this happen. A landlord sold out our property out from under us last year, with basically about 2 months' notice. Sold to Berkshire Hathaway, whose main strategy around the country and here are kind of buying up houses, flipping them around to the professional class, or this being Kalamazoo, the sons and daughters of wealthy people. Sending them to Western or K College. So, where does Bobby fall into all this? Let me explain. So, a few years ago, and for those of you who regularly listen to my coverage of local issues, this may sound like me beating a dead horse, but I really have to repeat it. A few years ago, 2015, Blue Ribbon Commission. We were trying to figure out, Kalamazoo, our budget was in a free fall, shortfall. How do we solve this? One of the answers that they came up with was a progressive income tax, i.e. tax the rich. Rich did not like that, particularly Southwest Michigan First. This is a big business lobby around here, threatened to kill it before it could even get out the door. Counter proposal that was worked on primarily by Mayor Hopewell. He helped come up with this and pitched it to Bill Johnston, Bill Parfett, the two main funders of the Foundation for Excellence, along with people like David Anderson, who's one of the city commissioners. Their idea was the Foundation for Excellence, which was, instead of doing a progressive income tax, we will have the city be primarily funded by these wealthy donors, this kind of philanthropic model. Kind of the scratch my back, I'll scratch yours element of that is this property tax cut, which, again, disproportionately helps people with the most property. Of course, it does give enough chump change to a lot of people with political power, the middle class, the West Mitchell, the Winchell Pete folks. It's like, oh, they're getting a few extra $100 a year. How nice. There's nothing bad about this. What could possibly be bad about this? Here's what's bad about this. You're privatizing a public budget. You are taking the democratic control of the city out from the hands of constituents and giving far more leverage to the billionaire class. And again, most people ask me, well, playing devil advocate, it's like, well, isn't it a good thing that they're, investing in the city and that they're giving the money to Kalamazoo so it can prosper? It's like, if their intentions were, that wholehearted, they would have just let the progressive income tax happen, and they wouldn't have set this mechanism up that would have also given them indirect control over the city to basically privatize the city. As my friend Jovan said a few weeks ago, he's on the show talking about being a housing stakeholder Foundation for Excellence. The Foundation for Excellence is essentially like a libertarian wet dream. It's the privatization of the city budget. That is the context under which he is being appointed to this board. The Michigan Economic Development Corporation, to represent public entities. Bobby Hopewell's greatest legacy was privatizing a majority stake of our city budget. And he is being appointed to a board to be in charge of public entities. The implications to that of me are extremely alarming. So what does that mean? Are we going to see a similar program to privatize the budget of the state of Michigan? And please don't think this couldn't happen under someone like Gretchen Whitmer, because let's be frank. Yeah, she's a lot better than Schuette would have been. But Bobby Hopewell, to most people, will leave office. People remember him as the nice liberal mayor who facilitated a lot of really great programs and facilitated this Foundation for Excellence, which, isn't it such a great thing? Convincing the billionaires to help fund the city. Wink, wink. I don't these kind of ideas are now going to be brought to a statewide platform. And again, this is not an attack on Mayor Hopewell's character. It is an attack on his ideology, his political worldview. This idea that we should basically, give the city budget over to people. Now, there are, practical things to think about. I'm sure in his head he was concerned about capital flight and capital strike. The idea that, like, if we didn't do this, then that investment would not be forthcoming, and then Kalamazoo would be broke. And this is a real problem that cities across the country are facing. Kalamazoo is not the only city to do stuff like this. There are many cities, particularly in the Rust Belt, that have had to sell off their public assets to private entities. But Kalamazoo is different and unique in the particular aspect that it wasn't just that we sold off like a municipal system or like one or two aspects of our city. We sold off our actual budget to the billionaire class. And that is why him being appointed to a Michigan Economic Development Board, particularly to oversee public entities, is so fundamentally concerning. Will the libertarian wet dream that is the foundation for excellence, the neoliberal wet dream that is the foundation for excellence, will that kind of policy be pursued at a statewide level? And let's not forget, last time we tried to privatize aspects of our state in ways that we thought would be economically beneficial, an entire city got poisoned. Don't think something like that can't happen again. And granted, even if you think the Bills and the other people involved in Foundation Excellence are individually some of the best people in the world, let's be very clear. If you scale up this model, there are going to be bad actors. There are going to be people who, in their heart of heart, care more about profit than people. And bad things will happen. So, with that, let's talk a little bit more, about this interesting article from Bridge, Michigan. And this is just going to be some facts and figures I want to shoot at you, but this is an opinion piece with some slides. Why Michigan's economic good times aren't that good. So, let's talk a little bit about it. A lot of people talk about how unemployment rates are decreasing in Michigan. We talked a lot about this last week. But, again, Michigan is poor. We rank number 31 in per capita income. Average income is $46,201. That's from the absolute richest in Michigan down to the very poorest. By comparison, states like Connecticut, the state of Connecticut is the richest, $71,800. And also, percentage of population aged 25 to 64 with a BA, as in a bachelor's degree. One of the highest is Massachusetts, 43.4%. We hover at 29.1%. Of course, the context of that is like for many decades, Michigan was primarily a manufacturing state. We were one of the key Rust Belt states that employed its population in blue-collar jobs that didn't require a college degree. Of course, that's where most of the economy has headed since NAFTA and globalization really started shipping those kinds of jobs overseas. Still haven't really caught up with it, despite initiatives like the Kalamazoo Promise and the Michigan Promise. We're still less than 1 in 3 Michiganders has a college education. And of course, that's even without even going into deeper conversations about how a BA is not necessarily a guarantee of a job either. But again, that's where we stand. So Michigan's wages and benefits per capita are $28,416 a year. Michigan's employment to population ratio is 57.8%. we rank 38th in the nation. Again, I just talked about the BA thing. Let's talk a little bit of these employment numbers. Yeah, this is pretty staggering and unfortunate. And again, it is a result of a state that has not really kept pace with an economy that no longer really cares to employ people who do not work in certain sectors of the economy. The main wheelhouse that kept Michigan's economy going has not existed here for the better part of 20, 30 years. We've still never properly addressed it. Just these kind of piecemeal solutions about like bringing in one particular company to bring in like a certain X number of jobs. But we're talking about an entire sector of Michigan's economy that was wiped out by NAFTA, wiped out by globalization. You can't replace that by incentivizing like Google or incentivizing Amazon or one particular corporation or another to bring in like a handful of jobs. And that has been the strategy of both Democrats and Republican administrations in this state the last 20, 30 years. And again, the biggest push has been to privatize the hell out of our city government, which has been an abject failure. Of course, what you really need to do is democratize the workforce, incentivize people to build these private businesses. And there's been some degree of success in that in small kind of microbrewery businesses that work a little bit more cooperatively. I wouldn't even go so far as call them worker co-ops to any degree or extent, but companies that have more kind of progressive or workers' values have done better in this economy. Of course, they do everything they can to impede that. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine about what will likely be the growth of marijuana businesses following legalization. It is set up in such a way to incentivize big businesses to monopolize, because a license for a dispensary in the state can cost you as much as $150,000. Now ask yourselves. Maybe you sold weed in the underground economy. Maybe you had friends who did. How many of them do you think could afford $150,000 to start a marijuana business? The structure of our state legislation and government is set up in such a way that discourages those kind of democratic businesses, that kind of democratic model for building a business in lieu of incentivizing big corporations to come in and start up and build. And that's going to be very important to pay attention to, particularly here in the city of Kalamazoo, which again, my guess, we're going to be seeing a hell of a lot of dispensaries in this town. Who gets to open those dispensaries is a huge question. I advise everybody to pay a whole lot of attention to that. Just want to break down this other number, which I found very interesting. Because again, we were talking last week a lot about how, you know, unemployment may have gone down in totality, but the quality of jobs has gone down. Wages too. There's 4.2 million jobs in Michigan. 56% of those jobs, that's majority, have are wages beneath $37,690. And then 23% is over $61,000, and 22% is between $37,690 and $61,000. So vast majority of jobs in Michigan are beneath $37,000. Number of jobs by wages and education requirement. So let's talk about this. All of the high-paying jobs require a BA the vast majority of them, I'm looking at this, require a BA or higher. So of the close to 1 million jobs in the state that can make you 61 grand or higher, about 3/4 of them require college education. Now, even going back a few decades, looking at the, adjusting for inflation, a factory worker could make close to those wages literally just working in a factory. And for the bottom rung, no BA required. That eats up about close to 2.5 million of Michigan's jobs. About 4/5 of them require no BA, but a good 1/5 of those jobs require other post-secondary or some other kind of degree. Again, very different from the golden age of Michigan capitalism, where you could make a pretty high standard of living without higher education. So the good paying jobs, and they qualify that as anything around the $61,000 mark, 77% of those jobs require a BA or higher, just to break it down in hard numbers. And 43% of Michigan households can't afford basic necessities. 3 main conclusions that this article draws out: not enough Michiganders work, too many Michiganders work in low-wage jobs, and college attainment among Michiganders is still extremely low. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and close out the show. Quick shout out to some events coming up this week. So on this weekend is going to be the Kalamazoo Poetry Festival. Please go check that out. There's going to be a Kosecha Kalamazoo is doing a banner walk on April 12th. That's Friday at 5:30 p.m. over the Town and Country Supermarkets. This is kind of getting ready for their May Day events. Again, it's an immigrant rights group. They're going to be meeting at the Town and Country over in the Edison neighborhood at 5:30 p.m. on Friday. Saturday at 1:30 p.m. there's going to be a workshop sponsored by the Kalamazoo Poetry Festival on consent. That's going to be at 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. over at the YWCA. Also going on, excuse me. On Monday, the local chapter of the IYSSE, International Youth and Students for Social Equality, are going to be organizing a carpool to Ann Arbor. They are going to be having a speaker there to talk about the resurgence of fascism. Particularly, it's going to be... and I just bought this book, haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, but it is called Why They Are Back. The book particularly focuses on the resurgence of fascism in Germany, but of course, kind of has some very important implications for us here in the U.S. So I'm going to play a little bit of a clip. This is from the tour. This will probably be the last of the show. So if you are interested in going, hit up the WMU chapter of the IYSSE. They will be leaving, I believe, around 5:30 or so. And this will be Monday.
"74 years after the end of the Nazi regime, the danger of fascism and war is growing in every country in the world.
But we are being invaded.
You have Trump in the United States.
We will never be a socialist country.
There's the far-right AfD in the German parliament. And the terror attack in New Zealand showed that it can happen anywhere. The huge majority of youth and workers want to fight fascism. But in order to do that, they have to understand where it comes from. And that is why I'm coming to the United States to present my new book, Why Are They Back? which explains the lessons of history and why it is necessary to fight capitalism in order to fight fascism. I'm coming to Detroit, New York, California, and many other places. Attend a meeting and join the fight against fascism and war.